Okay, right. I'm going to make a start if that's okay. I'm hoping there's some people on the line. I can't see, I can't see anyone, so it's a little bit disconcerting. But hopefully, fingers crossed, there's some people who've logged in this morning. So what I'll do is I will introduce myself very quickly, and then I'll give you a little bit of info in terms of what we're going to cover today, and then we'll dive into the session. So thanks for joining this morning. Really, really appreciate it. And thanks to Pro Manchester as well. I only joined Pro Manchester probably about a couple of months ago. So really pleased to have the opportunity to kind of introduce myself to some people who are in the network. I've already had a couple of opportunities to speak with some people, and all good things so far. So yeah, really pleased to be running the session this morning. I'm also going to start with an apology at the start of this session. Anyone who's logged in for a pottery class around Kintsugi, which I would love to be able to do. Unfortunately, we're not going to be doing that this morning. Instead, we're going to be talking about psychology. That's my background. That's what we do as a business. So, like I say, if anyone knows where to go for some proper Kintsugi classes, then I'm way up for that. But at the same time, hopefully there's some useful stuff in there related to psychology and well-being and resilience. And like I said, I'll tell you a bit more about what we're gonna cover. Just a little bit about my background. So like I said, my name's Matt. I'm a business psychologist. I've worked as a business psychologist for about 12 years now. And about 4 years ago, set up my own company called Sisu Psychology. So Sisu is actually, for those who don't know, it's a Finnish word, which stands roughly for resilience. So it's kind of when you've tried really hard at something and you persevered, at the very end of that perseverance, then you can tap into your Sisu. And they talk about it as a Finnish characteristic that they have, a national characteristic. Saying that, I've never been to Finland. I don't speak Finnish, but I just really love the word and I love the idea. So we named the company after it. In terms of the work that we do, it's mainly specialising in the areas of well-being and resilience at work. We work with all sorts of different clients. I've had the opportunity to work in all sorts of different settings over the last 12 years, whether that's in the public sector. I've worked a lot in the NHS and police forces and different councils, that sort of thing. In the private sector, I've worked with different engineering firms and pharmaceuticals and banks and all sorts, and in the UK and abroad. And this sounds really corny at the start of a session like this, but the one thing that connects those organizations and those companies, regardless of where they are or what they do, are people. And my firm belief that if people are healthy and happy and have a good level of well-being and resilience at work, then it's good for you in terms of how you think and feel, but it's also good for the organizations as well, which hopefully I'll prove to you as we go through the session today. So in terms of some of the work that we do really quickly, we use digital products. So we use a lot of kind of online tools, virtual delivery. We did that before the world ended, but is obviously coming to sharper focus now. So using different aspects of virtual delivery. We've got a mobile app that I can tell you a little bit more about, and some online tools really to bring our content to life. We love data. I shouldn't really say that in public, should I? But using the principles of evidence-based practice and making sure that everything we do is grounded in the latest kind of academic research and science around this stuff, and that we can show that the work that we do has a measurable outcome over time. And then finally, behavior change is at the heart of everything that we do. I'm a big fan of habits. I believe, and during this session, as an individual, when you're watching this, I'm not expecting you to have some sort of life-changing epiphany as a result of an hour sat in front of your computer, but my expectations are low and realistic. Even if there's one or two things that you think, do you know what, that's quite interesting, that's quite useful, that's something I can take forward for me or for my business, I'd be absolutely delighted by that. And I'd rather that people did that as a result of our sessions, go away with a couple of things that actually stick and they can form a habit around, rather than go away with lots of different things that then don't happen when they get back in the chaos of real life. So that's background. And again, I should have mentioned this at the start, we've got the Q&A on. So if anyone's got any questions as we're going through the session, more than happy to try and cover those off and answer any questions that you might have, particularly when we're getting to the content and some of the subjects that I'm going to be touching on. So it is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, this session this morning. It's built around this philosophy of Kintsugi, which I will tell you a bit more about in just a second. But we're going to look at different aspects around the things to do with, the elephant in the room, the pandemic. What's the emotional impact of the pandemic? What can we tell from previous research of similar macro large-scale events in the past, and the impact that has on people? I'm going to be touching on resilience. I'm going to start by defining resilience. What does it mean? What does it not mean? There's a few misconceptions around it. And look at some practical tools that you can use to build both personal and organizational resilience. And then finally, something that's going through it is the use of technology. Like I say, I'm a little bit of a data geek and this sort of thing, and real believer that whilst technology has its risks associated with it, risks when it comes to our well-being, we can also harness it to really help us build up this area as well. So let's dive into the session. Like I say, if you've got any questions as we're going through, please feel free to use the Q&A and I will do my best to cover them off as I go. So in terms of an introduction of the content, I wanted to start with this analogy, this metaphor around this idea of Kintsugi. So Kintsugi, for those who haven't come across it before, stands for golden, or it means golden joinery. It's a Japanese ancient art form where you'll probably have seen these. Whenever they break a pot or a cup or something like that, and they fix it back together. And as the picture shows there, rather than trying to hide those cracks and make the item back to exactly as it was before, instead they actually fix the cracks with golden lacquer. And the reason they do it is they want to celebrate those cracks as part of the history of that item. And I just thought when I was reading about this idea, there's a really interesting read across a metaphor for what's going on at the moment with the pandemic and the way in which it's impacted people and businesses. It can feel sometimes like our world has been dropped on the floor and it's shattered into 100 pieces. And we are currently in the process of sticking it back together again. And we've got two choices. We can either try and put it back together exactly as it was before, and we can all, completely forget the last 6, 12, 18 months, however long, and pretend to go back to normal. Or we could say, what have we learned as a result of everything that went on? Is there anything that actually I want to take with me going forward? I know personally, as a result of everything that's happened, sure, there's been some negative sides, but at the same time, spending a lot more time with my kids, working differently from home. It showed you a different way of working, not spending all my time up and down the country on a train, for example. And there'll be some things that actually this has allowed me to press the pause button and say, maybe I do want to take that with me. And at the same time, I think that this highlights people's kind of natural resilience, their ability to adapt. Again, I've come across, and I have the opportunity to speak with loads of different people in lots of different walks of life and lots of different businesses, and the way that they're adapting, the way that they're kind of adapting their approach to be able to come out of this potentially stronger than they were before is fascinating and really, really good to see. So I was really, I was really interested in this philosophy and whether we could use it as a kind of an idea to build some practical tools around. So I wanted to look at ways, such as, being patient and being kind. Being patient is certainly something which is required in Kintsugi, but it is also required at the moment. Things are not happening very quickly. For those of us who thought that we might be out of this pandemic within a couple of months, that's not happened. So patience is certainly something we need to look at. Kindness is another one. It's hard. There are some people who haven't been that impacted by everything that's gone on, and they've just carried on. And actually, like I said before, there may even be people on the line who have seen some real positives as a result of the pandemic. And again, you don't need to feel guilty about that, but there'll be other people who've really struggled, found it really stressful. Maybe it's impacted their business. And that, one of the things I look at today is the natural response to stress. And one thing is, if you've been stressed out, or if you've, found it exciting, or whatever it may be, if you've had an emotional response to everything that's gone on, that means that you're a human being, first and foremost, because as humans, we react to all sorts of different things. There's also a piece in here around acting. So again, this goes into the adaptability that I've seen from people. There's a real risk that when something like this happens, we stop for too long. We stop and we worry about worrying, and we almost get stopped in our tracks and we aren't able to adapt. But instead of that, how can we actually take steps to say, right, I'm going to do something one way or the other to come out of this stronger than before? That's where resilience comes in. Again, I will define resilience in a bit more detail later on. But the other thing that comes into it is the impact on other people and connecting people and helping other people to solve their problems as well. Kintsugi actually needn't be done on your own. The idea of this philosophy, this art form, is that you can work with somebody, you can help someone to put their pottery back together. And again, interesting read across with how we're supporting people and how it brings people together when you're faced with a crisis, when you're faced with a challenge like we're seeing today. So with that in mind, and with that as a kind of a broad philosophy for the session, I wanted to look at first off, a little bit of the data. Obviously, I said I'm into my data, and behind this and what we can learn from previous pandemics, and then some of the practical things that I think we can actually put into place. So let's start with some data, and let's start with some hope to begin with, okay? So before I dive into this graph, and I will explain what it's showing here, because again, I'm a little bit of a geek when it comes to this stuff. When all of this kicked off, when the world ended in early March and end of Feb, first thing I did was I said, right, let's look for parallels. You know, what can we tell about the psychology of what's going on? And let's look for parallels from similar things like this happening in the past. And the simple answer is it was very difficult to look for exact parallels. You know, we've not seen anything on this sort of scale since we're told the Spanish flu back in 1918, which I had no idea about until all this kicked off. But that's probably the last, you know, large-scale global pandemic that's had this sort of death toll that we've seen on a global scale. The problem with the Spanish flu was it was back in 1918, so there wasn't any social media. The world was a very different place. It wasn't as connected as it is today, and also there weren't as many published researchers kind of publishing their research that we can collecting data that we can look back on. More recently, there have been pandemics. So the most kind of commonly known one is the SARS virus in 2003, and that's a really interesting one for me because whilst it was a few years back, it was similar in a sense that social media existed. You know, the world was a more similar, more connected place than to what it seems to today. Now, that wasn't on the same scale as what we're seeing today, you know, far from it. You know, the number of deaths was far fewer than what we're seeing at the moment. But I believe in the height of the crisis, in the height of the pandemic and the SARS outbreak in Hong Kong in 2003, the perception was that this could be the next global pandemic on the scale that we're seeing today. So certainly it tells us something in terms of the emotional impact of that. And actually, there's loads of research around what happened to people emotionally and physically during 2003 in Hong Kong as a result of the SARS virus. And there's some really interesting stuff in there. So one thing, not surprisingly, is you did see an emotional reaction to that. So you saw anxiety really go through the roof and spike. You saw levels of happiness and people's life satisfactions taking a dip. But one of the other things that you saw was that people actually rebounded relatively quickly. And this is linked into something which is known as subjective well-being homeostasis. Okay, so some long words there. So what does that actually mean? So subjective well-being, if we break it down, is basically how you're feeling. It's pleasure and purpose. So are you happy, excited, enjoying your life? But at the same time, do you feel like you've got a purpose? Do you feel like what you're doing is worthwhile, like you're contributing to something? Some of us are more pleasure driven, you know, we're more hedonists, where it's all about just having a good time. Others of us are more purpose driven, so it's more about actually achieving something. But we've all got those two things, and that's what amounts to our subjective well-being. And the homeostasis bit is almost like a set point that we have, okay? Now, the classic example of homeostasis is our body temperatures when we talk about physical well-being. So our body temperature has a set point, and each of us will have a slightly different set point when it comes to body temperature. And if that temperature shifts even 1 or 2 degrees either way, up or down, that can be a sign that there's something wrong with us and it's time to go see a doctor or we're getting an illness or whatever it may be. And so that's true when it comes to our physical well-being, but it's also true when it comes to our psychological well-being. There's some interesting research that suggests we have like a well-being set point. You know, like maybe you're generally a 6 out of 10, or maybe you're an 8 out of 10, or maybe you're a 10 out of 10, perhaps. You're a real optimist. But what happens is you have good days and you have bad days. It will dip and it will come up again. Sometimes you get stressed out, sometimes you're bored, but you tend to come back to that set point. And back to the research that we saw in Hong Kong in 2003, we saw that whilst there was an initial spike in terms of levels of anxiety, a dip in happiness and purpose, that those things started to creep back up towards that set point. And actually, they found that 4 months after the height of the virus, people in Hong Kong were feeling like they were kind of back to normal psychologically. Now, that's not to say that this is exactly the same as we're seeing today. Obviously, this is on a different scale, so we'd expect that bounce back to be slightly slower. But the recent data around this is starting to offer some hope around that. So this data that you're seeing on the screen now is from the Office of National Statistics. You may or may not know, but in addition to lots of different factors around gross domestic GDP and gross domestic product. The government also collects a lot of data around how people are feeling and their gross national well-being, and that's what we're showing here. So you can see from these different lines. Let's take the one at the bottom, the green line. That's levels of anxiety. Mid-March, when we're really starting to find out about the pandemic and the impact that it could have, you can see there was a huge spike in levels of anxiety than we would expect from that time of year. When it comes to purpose, happiness, life satisfaction, again, those ones at the top, you can see there was a dip in those positive items. So it's exactly as we would have expected and predicted as a result of everything that was going on. But as you can then see, these things are starting to creep back towards that set point again. So anxiety is starting to come down. It's now just below 4 rather than over 5 out of 10 this is. Levels of happiness, as shown by the yellow line, whilst they dipped to nearly 6, are now up above 7 again. So I think what this shows us is that there is some hope around this, and that people are naturally resilient creatures. We are naturally resilient as a species. We are able to adapt to things. Like I said before, I don't want to get into the realms of toxic positivity. If you've really struggled and if you still feel like you're on that spike of anxiety, that's fine, and that means that you're a human being. Different people have different ways of dealing with different things. But for a lot of us, this natural resilience, this natural ability to adapt and to bounce back from things is really encouraging, and something that we want to build on, really. And that's where the practical tools come in. Really quickly, there's some other really interesting stuff around the data and around the research around this stuff. So, for example, whilst levels of personal anxiety rose and happiness dipped in Hong Kong, they found that other aspects of well-being actually increased. So things like community connectedness really shot up. And again, we saw a lot of this when we were doing the clap for the carers, perhaps, and you were seeing neighbours that you'd not even run into before. So community connectedness increased. Awareness of mental health and physical exercise increased. I know certainly when we were in proper lockdown and we were allowed to do an hour a day, I felt like people were doing more exercise than they ever have done. There was a lot of people for whom an hour was a lot less than they would usually do. I would say there's a huge bunch of people who an hour was a lot more. So actually, it kind of brought our well-being to the forefront. And we even see things like values shifting as well. So really quickly, there's some studies and there's some research to suggest that our values change based on our experience, but also based on our age. Okay. And what some of the research shows is that when we're younger, we are very goal focused. Okay, not surprising. It's all about what am I going to do with my career? What am I going to achieve? What do I want to get out of life? When you get older, and in particular when people are over kind of 75, 80 years old, actually their values start to noticeably shift away from those goal-focused values towards more emotionally meaningful values. So it's more about how am I going to connect to the people that I love? How am I going to support people around me? And this is the mechanism behind that, they think, and the hypothesis around this, is that happens because people at that age are more aware of the fragility of life. They're thinking, maybe I don't have that long left. Maybe they've had a health scare recently. So they start to shift their focus and their values onto the things that really mean something to them rather than something they want to achieve. And what's really interesting for me is during 2003, at the height of the SARS virus, they measured people's values and they broke it down by people's age. And what they showed was that gap between young people focusing on goals and older people focusing on emotionally meaningful values, that disappeared during the SARS virus. And again, they think the mechanism behind that was because, younger people were reminded almost daily, when you look at social media now, when you look at the mainstream media, we're reminded daily about the fragility of life. And actually that, again, it brings into sharper focus maybe those things that are more emotionally meaningful for us, so less about what am I going to achieve and more about, what really matters to me and what do I want to do with my life. And I just think that's an interesting one. What they found with the research in Hong Kong was that gap then reappeared after a few months after the crisis was over and the challenge had kind of melted away. But again, as I described with the Kintsugi metaphor before, what do you want to take forward with you? This has pressed a big pause button on the whole country, the whole world, really. And it's right. What has this allowed you to see slightly differently? Whether it shifted your values, whether it shifted how you see mental health or physical health. and how we're going to maintain some of the things that you want to maintain going forward, while at the same time looking at practical ways that we can bounce back and that we can adapt to certain difficulties around here. So like I say, I'm into my data, and I think it's just an interesting context in some of this stuff. But what I wanted to do was look at some of the more kind of practical tools around these things to give you something to actually leave with, okay? Behavior change, like I said, is at the heart of everything that we do. Behavior change is hard, notoriously hard. I'm not going to say that we've cracked it. I don't think anyone has. I think I'd be a millionaire if I knew how to change everyone's behavior and get everybody doing all the best things for their health on a regular basis. It's difficult, but one thing that we do know is that whilst it is difficult, it's about breaking it down. It's about taking one step at a time. It's about starting with yourself. You know, what do you want to change, and building that motivation around it, and then building up those healthy habits on top. And again, there's some of the aspects that I wanted to touch on. So the first aspect that I really wanted to talk about was this idea that behavior change, a lot of behavior change, starts with self-awareness. You know, in order to change something, you've got to have an awareness of where you're at and perhaps where you want to get to. And to help us explain this in terms of the impact of a pandemic, or the impact of different challenges, or, you know, this doesn't all need to be in the realms of pandemics. You know, there are other things that we're still stressed out by, you know, things at work, things outside of work. And this is true of that as well when we're talking about resilience and well-being. But one of the things that we do know is that as well as a psychological response to these things, we also have a physiological response. Our body is literally wired to respond to challenges. And put very simply, or relatively simply, this is all based around an aspect of our body called the HPA axis, which stands for hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal gland. Okay, so I'll put that in simple terms. So when we go into a challenging situation, a part of our brain called the hypothalamus, it's almost like the control center for our brain. It makes a decision as to whether, yes, I can deal with this problem, you know, it's something that I'm going to be able to overcome, or actually it's something that I might struggle with. And based on that decision, what it does is it switches on one of two systems in our body. So the first system is this what we call sympathetic system, and it's almost like the accelerator pedal. Okay. So when you go into a difficult situation, your body says, I might not be able to deal with this. The demands might outweigh my resources, and it presses that accelerator pedal. It passes a signal onto our pituitary gland, which then passes a signal onto our adrenal gland, and it literally releases adrenaline into our body. Now that's very useful. We need that adrenaline. It gives us a shot of energy that we need to deal with the difficulty that we're faced with. It's very useful. It's an evolutionary trait that we have. The problem comes, as we'll look at in a second, is when that accelerator pedal gets left on and you've got a constant feeling of anxiety, or maybe you're overreacting to things that you previously would have dealt with quite easily. And the other system that we can talk about is when you go into a situation and your hypothalamus says, yeah, do you know what, we can deal with this. We do have plenty of resources to be able to deal with this demand. And it switches on another system called the parasympathetic system, which is it's the opposite. It's the brake pedal. It calms us down, it puts us into rest and digest phase, it doesn't release adrenaline into our system. And again, very, very useful. It allows us to recharge our batteries. The one downside to that is if that gets left on as well, it can lead to problems as well. And that is where we bring in this idea of, again, long words around this, called something called allostatic load. Okay, so let me again try to break this one down. So allostatic load is like the natural wear and tear that happens on our bodies. So if you think about it like this, we've got those two systems, the sympathetic system, the accelerator pedal, and the parasympathetic system, the brake pedal. And generally speaking, we're trying to keep ourselves somewhere in that normal range. Again, sure, there'll be times when you're slightly stressed out, there'll be times when you're slightly bored and disengaged, whatever it may be. But generally speaking, you're staying in that normal range. Now, in reality, when something happens, so we've used the coronavirus as an example here, but it could be any kind of stressor or any demand that you come across. The risk is that your body psychologically, physiologically starts bouncing around a little bit. You spend longer than you'd like to in that sympathetic stage or that parasympathetic stage. And like I said, then the risk is that this starts to have an effect on our bodies. So for example, if the accelerator pedal gets left on, it can lead us feeling anxious or panicky or restless, or, you know, finding it difficult to sleep at night. The other risk is if it gets stuck on off, that can lead to feelings of lethargy, exhaustion, disconnection, fatigue. You know, you go to sleep for lots of hours at night, you get, 8-9 hours of sleep, but then you wake up and you still feel tired. If you're feeling that that's true of you, it may be that there's something going on here in terms of how you're reacting to the stresses around you. And it's really difficult because, self-awareness is a hard thing. We can tell pretty well how we're feeling in the moment, but also technology can give us an insight into this as well. So, for example, we use a bit of tech with some of our clients called Firstbeat, which is it's a heart rate variability monitor. I use it myself as well. So it's a heart rate variability monitor. You wear it for 2 or 3 days, and what it allows you to show is how much time your body is spending in that sympathetic or that parasympathetic mode. And again, the sympathetic mode is fine. You don't want to be stressed out. I don't like the words around this. You don't want to be stressed out, but you want to be pressured. You want to be, pressure yourself, challenge yourself, motivate yourself. But it will highlight quite quickly if you're spending too long in that zone, and vice versa with the parasympathetic state as well. So the Firstbeat tool is a really interesting one. You can also keep a diary alongside it. So you keep an online diary, and what that allows you to do is show you what in your life is stressing you out, and that can be quite illuminating sometimes, so certainly at the start of all this kicking off, I again, into my data, thought, right, I'll wear my heart rate variability monitor for a few days while I'm locked down in my house and see how I'm responding. And really interested in how much time I spent in that sympathetic stage. I wasn't doing things that would generally be perceived as stressful. I wasn't standing in front of 200 people at the front of the conference or anything like that. But even the little things just around the house, that lack of motivation, perhaps, finding that I was worried about, things in the future. That was tipping me into that sort of mode. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting. I think there's a certain amount that we can do in terms of just checking in with ourselves. How are you feeling on a regular basis? But also there's tech that can help with this as well. So if that's where we're at, and we've got that self-awareness, and you're thinking about, right, I'm going to check in with myself, check in with other people as well. We'll move on to this idea of building resilience, and in particular, if you're a leader within a business, or if you just have an impact on the people around you, if you influence the people around you, role modeling the positive behaviours that can build resilience is really, really crucial. I'm going to look at loads of different ways that you can build resilience, and just a quick reminder around habits. I'm not expecting you to say, yep, I want to do every single one of these things and become the most resilient person in the UK overnight. Instead, are there 1 or 2 things in there that you think, do you know what, that's quite interesting, that's quite useful, that's something that I do already that I want to build on, and forming habits around that is what we're looking for, and that's the real goal here. So let's look at some of these practical techniques. Before I do that, I'm just gonna look very, very quickly at the definition of resilience. I've talked about it quite a lot. It has become, let's be honest, a real buzzword over the last few years, particularly in the world of business. Everyone needs resilience, but what does it actually mean? And I think there's a few misconceptions around resilience as well. The misconceptions when I'm working with groups include things like it's just the ability to just carry on, to put your bulletproof vest on, to resist change, to persevere at all costs. It's the ability to bounce back comes up quite a lot, which certainly would link into resilience. But at what cost does that have to people? And the other thing that comes in with resilience quite commonly is this ability to cope. And I actually see coping as quite different from resilience. Okay, I'll explain why in just a second. So we have our textbook definition of resilience here, which is quite wordy. This modifiable capacity to utilize resources and skills to flexibly adapt to challenges or advantages, enabling thriving. What the heck does that mean? The easiest way of describing it is like a constant balancing act, as you see with here, between, again, as we described with stress before, on one side you have perceived resources, on the other side you have perceived demands. Generally speaking, if your resources outweigh your demands, you're in a pretty good place. You're able to deal with the things that life is throwing at you. The problem comes is when that balance tips the wrong way. Your demands increase, you come across some sort of challenge or crisis, and your resources are depleted. You stop doing the things that you would usually do to enhance your well-being. And as a result of that, that's what causes stress, as we looked at before. And as a result of stress, a lot of people, they employ coping mechanisms with that stress. Now, coping can be really useful, and I'm not going to steer you away from positive coping mechanisms you may have. You think about like exercise or whatever it may be, or connecting with someone. But there are also a whole host of negative coping strategies that people rely on. So things like Alcohol, drinking alcohol is a really common one. Eating chocolate, withdrawing from the situation entirely, just pretend it's not there and steer away from it. Or the other side of that would just be work harder, work longer hours, put your bulletproof vest on, toughen up, and get yourself through. And the problem with, the reason why people are drawn towards those coping mechanisms, all of them, the alcohol and the chocolate included, is because they work. All right. So I'm here as a wellbeing professional to tell you, next time you're stressed out, if you drink loads of wine and eat loads of chocolate, you will be less stressed out. It is an effective coping mechanism. However, please don't go and get drunk after the session. It's only Tuesday, and it's 10 a.m. It is obviously not a long-term coping strategy. Number one, it's not removing the stress, which is still there when you sober up. And number two, it might be having a detrimental effect on your health. So rather than that, what we're trying to do with resilience is, rather than always relying on coping, we're trying to move upstream. We're saying, what can we do in the good times to build our resources physically, psychologically, socially, emotionally? But also, is there something I can do to influence my demands? Now, the answer to that may sometimes be no. You think about the crisis at the moment, the coronavirus. To a certain extent, there is nothing we can do about that. Certainly, I don't know when a vaccine's coming, if it's coming, all that side of things. So some aspects maybe around acceptance and saying, right, maybe that's a part that I'm going to need to accept, but I'm not going to expend a huge amount of time, energy and resources trying to do that. Instead, I'm going to let that pass me by. And instead, I'm going to focus on the bits that I can control and I can influence. But then, like I say, the other side of the balance is there's a whole host of things that we can do to build up our resources. And you want to think of it like mental fitness. If you were going to build your physical well-being, you'd head to the gym, you'd eat the right things, you'd work on it. And it's the same psychologically. We want to do things, practical things, which can shift us and make a real difference over time. And that brings us on to some of the practical tools that I wanted to show you today. And put simply, there's loads, okay? And I could go on for hours and hours and hours showing you these different tools. I truly believe that if you find one that really works for you in here, it can make a really big difference. Like I said a number of times, around habits. We know when it comes to incremental improvements that we see people making, that even small things can make a huge difference further on down the line. If you're playing to your natural strengths and you're building up those resources over time. But one of the things I've mentioned is that you want to keep it holistic. Okay, so as it mentions here, you want to look physically, emotionally, mentally, purposefully. Start with self-awareness. Which is the bit that you're struggling with. Are you letting your physical well-being slip? Are you not doing the exercise you used to? Are you skipping meals? Are you eating lunch at your desk in front of your computer, perhaps? Then maybe that's an area you want to focus on. Is it emotionally? Are you finding yourself losing your temper? Is it mentally? Are you finding it difficult to concentrate? Or is it purposeful? Actually, you've got to a state where you're struggling to find meaning. What's the point in doing certain things that you're doing? And again, by checking in with yourself, it almost gives you a chance to say, where do I want to start? Because it's very difficult when you say, right, you should build your personal resilience and your personal well-being. But it's like, where the heck do I start? So by checking in with yourself, you might want to say, right, which one of these 4 pillars do I want to focus on first? Do I want to prioritize? So let me whiz you through a few of these, and hopefully you've come across or even do some of these things already. So the physical pillar on the left-hand side, really important one. They talk about physical well-being as the foundation for resilience, okay? And there's loads you can do around it. The classic ones, which hopefully you're aware of, are exercise, diet, and sleep. So making sure you've got a right amount of exercise. Meaningful exercise at least 3 times a week. More than that, I would say that movement more broadly is really important. So I'm meeting a lot of people at the moment who are spending a huge amount of time kind of stuck at their desk, feeling guilty about the fact that they might go for a break, or they might go and put the washing in the washing machine or something like that. And we want to break down that guilt, because we know that the research around this is conclusive. There's a consensus around this that if you're getting up and you're moving away from your desk and you're getting regular breaks, sure, you lose a bit of time that you're not productive in those minutes where you're away from your desk. But what you get back when you come back to your desk and you've got your mind's working again, you're thinking more creatively, your quality of thinking goes up. It far outweighs that time that you lose from the short break. So role modeling those sorts of behaviours and building that into your everyday routines around that is key. Food is a really important one as well. So diet. If you possibly can, try to eat healthy snacks, small healthy snacks throughout the day, rather than relying on big meals that will kind of send your energy levels up and down, peaks and troughs. And then finally, sleep. Sleep is when the vast majority of your what we call active recovery is done, when you shift into that parasympathetic mode and it recharges your batteries. There's, if I was forced to say, I would say there's nothing better than you can do for your well-being than look after your sleep, probably. Having a good night's sleep, investing in that, switching your tech off, avoiding alcohol late at night, not exercising too late at night as well. That would come into this as well. You might find yourself, if you exercise late at night, you get to sleep quickly, fine, but your body doesn't actually shift into that parasympathetic mode. It doesn't start recharging for a number of hours afterwards because you're still the adrenaline's going from having exercised. So trying to do things like that can be really crucial. And overlaid on top of this is this idea of natural energy, okay? And put very simply and very quickly, we all have natural oscillations and fluctuating levels of energy through the day. That's perfectly natural. We have things called circadian and ultradian rhythms. So, for example, circadian rhythms, we each have a natural peak of energy in the day. So me, for example, I kind of struggle to get going in the morning, whereas when the day goes on, I kind of the energy creeps up a bit. My wife, on the other hand, kind of bounds out of bed in the morning full of energy. Then she rolls over and sees I'm still there, and it all goes wrong after that. No, not quite yet. Anyway, hopefully, but certainly she peaks in the morning rather than the afternoon. And that's the first one. If you know when your natural peak of energy is, use that energy, or more specifically, don't waste it. I'll give you a specific example around that. If you are a morning person and you're at your very best from 8 till 10 in the morning, that's when your mind is working and you're most creative, do not spend the first couple of hours, your working day, trawling through emails that you could basically do in your sleep. Okay, that is a complete waste of energy. Now, I'm not naive enough to think there'll be some days when you've got an urgent email that you need to do and you get dragged into it. That's fine. You're not going to do this every day. But we're trying to make more conscious decisions around this. You may find that you're at your very best in the morning, but you do an hour working for emails, you've wasted that energy. You're tired at the end of it because you've been reading through these boring emails, half of which are spam anyway, and you've wasted that energy for the day. Now, you may be able to peak that back up by using some of the things that we've talked about, but you've wasted that kind of natural peak energy. So really key that you're not doing that, or you're trying to play to your natural rhythms. Really quickly, there's some stuff we can do in all the other areas as well. So emotional resilience, things like breathing. Again, it's quite a well-trodden path, but it's probably one of the best ways that you can use to quickly shift yourself from those accelerator pedal mode to the brake pedal mode. If you feel like you're really stressed out about something, you feel it building, one of the best things you can do is just breathe in for 5 seconds, out for 5 seconds, and then hold that breath for 5 seconds. Just do that a couple of times, and it quite literally shifts your physiology into that brake pedal mode rather than accelerator pedal mode. Mindfulness, you couldn't possibly got through a session on wellbeing resilience without me mentioning mindfulness, right? It's everywhere at the moment. There's a couple of things I'd say about mindfulness. Hopefully you know about what mindfulness is, staying in the present moment. But I'd say find a way that works for you. You don't need to change into your yoga kit and sit in a darkened room to practice mindfulness. I do a minute at a time. So I stick a minute on my phone when I just want to, calm myself down, focus myself, and I'll just sit in my chair. I don't change anything up. I just do maybe like a body scan exercise just for 60 seconds to create that emotional shift in yourself. The other thing I'd say with mindfulness is if you are going to give it a go, give it a chance. The reason I say that is because I meet a lot of people who are, they say to me, oh, I tried mindfulness and it didn't work for me. What they really mean is they did 15 minutes of meditation on the Headspace app or something like that, and they didn't attain some sort of Zen-like bliss. So therefore, mindfulness doesn't work. Obviously, it's practice makes perfect around this stuff. The more we do it, the better we get at it. Changing your how you view stressful situations. There's loads of techniques, therapy techniques really, around CBT and acceptance and commitment therapy. And don't worry, I'm not going to turn this into a therapy session, but there are loads of techniques that you can use, light touch techniques that you can use in those aspects of the research that can really help you out. CBT is more about how do I catch negative thoughts and change them. ACT is more about how do I notice that a negative thought is there, but accept it for what it is and focus on the bits that really matter to me. So it's more akin to kind of mindfulness practice in that way. And also it links into this idea of practicing gratitude. What really matters to you? I talked about values before and how actually our values may naturally shift during a pandemic to more emotionally meaningful values and goals. So again, how do you make the most of that? How do you show gratitude? Keep yourself gratitude journals of the things that really matter to you. Mental, again, tons of things you can do. Pomodoro technique, getting really popular at the moment, particularly with people working at home. I've used it for a number of years. I'm even sad enough to get myself a little timer. So the Pomodoro technique, for those who don't know, break your day into 25-minute chunks, and you sequentially process tasks. So you don't multitask, okay? So you focus on one thing, 25 minutes, put your SAM timer on or your alarm on your phone, switch all the other distractions off and just focus on that one thing for 25 minutes. At the end of that, you do 5 minutes of something else. Get up, move around, speak to someone, do something different. And then you go back to the 25. 25, 5, 25, 5, 25, 5. Again, I'm not naive enough to think that people do that all day, every day. I'm not even crazy enough to do that sort of thing. But you'd be surprised, how much energy we expend physically, mentally, emotionally from just juggling things all the time and trying to multitask. So turning that down can really help us out. Focusing on long-term value. So the night before a work day, say, right, what are the 2 things that need to happen tomorrow? Do those things first. Leaving your desk, we talked about this, changing up your environment. Hide things around the house that you need for your working day so that you're forced to get up and move around and you don't just sit in front of your computer. And not letting tech drive us. I said that tech can be really useful when it comes to forming habits, but it's also got real problems with it. Email's the biggest one. And also, obviously, the extent to which people are using Teams meetings and Zoom calls and all the rest of it at the moment. Maybe actually check email once or twice a day. Maybe there's certain times of the day when you look at it, and the other times of the day, you switch it off. Before I do the final one around purposeful, there's just one really important point there around all this stuff. Which is around habit formation. Okay, so you look at all these sorts of things, including the purposeful. So I'll just cover it off quickly. So finding a flow state, doing difficult things that really matter to you. I talked about values before, or even developing and utilizing your strengths. Do the VIA character strengths questionnaire online and find out where your strengths are and play to those strengths. So when it comes to habits, we know, a lot of us know all this, a lot of these things. There might be something new in there that you want to form something around, but there might be some things that you've tried before. I've tried to eat healthy, I've tried to go for a walk in the afternoon, but I never get it to stick. And that's where habits come in. And habits are incredibly important when it comes to personal resilience. They drive, they reckon, 45 to 50% of everything that we do on a daily basis is driven by habits. And if we break this down, there's a couple of ways that we can get these things to stick. The first one is form habits based on identity, okay? Decide who you want to be as a person and prove that to yourself with small wins, rather than setting yourself outcome-based goals, okay? I'll give you an example of that. So let's look at weight loss, real common kind of thing that people do, and looking around exercise and diet. When people want to lose weight, what they generally do is they start with the outcome in mind. I want to lose 2 stone. I want to lose 3 stone because I want to get into these jeans. And when I reach that magic number, then I will somehow feel incredibly happy and completely different to how I feel right now. The problem with that approach, outcome-focused approach, is number one, people set goals that are too hard. So you say, I want to lose 3 stone. After a few weeks or months, you've only lost a few pounds and you think, this is too hard. I'll go back to the way I was before. Or the other risk is maybe you do reach your outcome goal. You do get into that pair of jeans. You lose the 3 stone. And then what do? Do you set yourself a new goal? Do you just maintain that? How do you maintain that? And again, people get a bit lost there. And the risk is that then they bounce back to where they were before. So instead of outcome-based goals, we want to turn this on its head. We want to start with identity. Who are you as a person? An example around the weight loss bit would be, maybe define yourself as a runner. I'm someone who runs regularly. I'm a cyclist. I'm someone who eats healthy. If I ask my best friend, tell me something about me, they'd say, oh, well, you're always eating healthy. It's something that I know about your identity. Prove it to yourself with small wins. You layer routines on top of that. You need systems to be able to put that into place. But you'll find the beauty of that approach, if you start with identity and you layer the systems on top, the outcomes look after themselves. I guarantee you, here's an insight, I guarantee you that if you define yourself as a runner and a cyclist and you do that regularly, and you define yourself as someone who eats healthy, you will lose weight. guaranteed. Okay, it's just that will happen because the identity will drive those outcome based goals. And the final one would be moving from I can't to I don't. You know, that's an identity thing. A few years back, I was drinking a lot of caffeine. I felt like it was bouncing my energy around all over the place. So I said to myself, right, I need to stop doing this. So I forgot everything I know as a psychologist, and I started with an outcome. You know, I'm going to stop drinking caffeine. I can't drink caffeine anymore. Someone had offered me a tea or coffee, and I'd say, I can't. I'm off caffeine at the moment. Problem with that was it wasn't sustainable. I'd have those days when I was absolutely shattered, and someone would offer me at the right time, and I'd say, oh, go on then. I'll have the one. So instead of that, I shifted to I don't. I started saying, I don't drink caffeine. It's just not something I do. In the same way that a vegetarian wouldn't say, oh, I can't eat that steak today. They'd say, I don't eat steak. It's not something that I do. And it worked for me. I've not drunk caffeine in 3 years. Well, saved a few Jaeger bombs here and there. But I don't drink tea, coffee. Don't drink caffeine in 3 years. And it's really something that's got to stick. And then the final bit around habits, I would say, is the cues in your environment. We have an opportunity with everything that's gone on at the moment. In your normal life, you know, let's take ourselves back, 9 months before all this happened. Your life was full of cues, of environmental triggers that created a cascade of habits. So you got up in the morning and a cascade of habits just started. You brush your teeth, you have a shower, you have breakfast. That almost happens on autopilot. But then you head into work, and again, you're hit with a cascade of environmental cues, and the habits start to happen. You make yourself a brew in the morning, you open up your laptop, you go straight onto your emails, you speak to someone next to you, all those sorts of things. Now, that has shifted. That's changed. People are working very differently. They're working remotely. They're working, different hours and that sort of thing. And that, whilst it brings a risk, it can be stressful sometimes. There's also an opportunity in there. What do you want your new life to look like? What are your new environmental cues that you want to be able to drive the right type of habits rather than the wrong ones? And we use a mobile app that we have to deliver all of our content. So it sits alongside the sessions, the coaching and the training that we do. And the idea of the app is that, we have people coming on the sessions, and you might have a really good time, and you might see things like this and think, right, yeah, I'm gonna do those 3 things. But then you go away and you forget about it because you go into the chaos of real life. The app is about putting the learning in your pocket. So what was that thing that Matt said about mindfulness? What was that thing that he said about active recovery? And you can tap back into that. You can pick up the app when you need it. You can get quick tips on there, but also it's got a habit tracker on it, so you can set yourself up notifications, and the notifications will nudge you just when you need it. So I've got one saying eat healthy lunches, and it comes on at 12:15 p.m. so just at that moment when I'm about to reach for the big bag of crisps that I shouldn't be grabbing, my phone buzzes at me and it says, I know you don't want to, but eat healthy lunches. And it's just that nudge when you need it to drive the positive behavior rather than the negative one. So there's a whole load of ideas around this in terms of habit formation and getting this stuff to stick. If you're thinking about for yourself today, even start with one. Pick one of these things, think about your environmental cues, form an identity around it, and that's how you get those things to stick long term. Right then, I've got 10 minutes left. I've been talking quite a lot, but there's just one final bit that I wanted to look at, which is more kind of business or organizational focused well-being. I wanted to leave a couple of minutes at the end if I can as well for some questions. If there's any questions so far, please let me know. But I'll try and leave a couple of minutes at the end for questions as well. But I just wanted to whiz through this bit as well, because I think it's really important, particularly again with everything that's gone on. Certainly investing in our own health and well-being is crucial, and some of us are better at it than others. But I also believe that well-being and resilience, it can't operate in isolation. It needs to be systemic within a business for it to work and for you to see those benefits. There is no point coaching individuals how to be resilient in isolation. So let's make them really resilient so they can deal with tough stuff, and then let's chuck them back into work whether it's a really stressful situation. Again, that's not helping anybody. So we need to, the metaphor we use, bake it into a business rather than see it as the sprinkles on top. Again, one of the things that I see a lot of organizations that I work with try and do is, I'll ask them, what do you do around well-being? And it's, well, we've got access to a gym, we've got, we'll put fruit on people's desks and all that sort of stuff, which is brilliant. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with well-being benefits. but they are the sprinkles on top. When actually, what are you doing to actually fundamentally improve people's working lives? Have they got the working relationships and the support that they need? Do they have the purpose? Do they know why their role's important? Do they have control and autonomy? It's those things that drive well-being, in addition to the sprinkles on top, which is still tasty as well. So there is one final kind of slide around this, which is around creating a resilient strategy. And again, I'm not going to be able to tell you in 6 minutes how to build an entire resilient strategy for your business, but hopefully I can start the kind of creative juices going in your mind. There's a couple of models which are useful with this. The one on the right-hand side I'll start with. This is called the 4 Ps model, something that we use a lot within Sisu. So the 4 Ps are, it's all about looking at psychological health and safety, like you would do physical health and safety, okay? And what we generally find is that organizations are quite good on the first and the 4th P. So the first one is the promotion of health and well-being. So do you have a cycle to work scheme? Do you put fruit on people's desks? Do you talk about well-being on a regular basis? That's great. And the promotion of health and well-being is done better than it ever has been done in the past. And that's really good to see. The other side that organizations generally do well is the provision of support and resources, the 4th one. So when people fall off the other edge, when they get stressed out, when it becomes an issue, you provide them with support. You may have an employee assistance program. You will support them as managers. You will point them towards counseling services, all those sorts of things. And again, great. I think the more we can do to improve that, the better. But the area where the gap usually lies is in the 2nd and 3rd P. So the second one is prevention of avoidable risk. In the same way that if you were working physically, from height to whatever it may be, is there something that you could just not do that's causing you stress? Is there something that you could remove from that person's job? And again, think psychologically. Are there aspects of that person's job or your own job that stress you out that you could just not do? You could avoid those risks. But then obviously there are going to be some unavoidable risks. Work is hard. Work is sometimes stressful. But then that doesn't mean that we shouldn't protect from it. Again, using the analogy of physical health and safety, you wouldn't expect someone to work from height. Maybe you say working from height is an unavoidable risk of this person's job. They've got to go up to the roof to put the tiles on. Of course they do. But it doesn't mean that you don't give them a harness. It doesn't mean you don't give them a hard hat. They still need protection from those risks. You wouldn't expect somebody to, handle hazardous materials without gloves. They need protection from that. And think about that psychologically as well. What's your psychological PPE when it comes with dealing with some of those unavoidable risks? So maybe there are certain aspects of your job which are stressful and push you one way or the other. But what's your PPE? What's your protection from that? And again, you want to think about a resilient strategy, a well-being strategy, look at all 4 of these levels systemically. And then the thing on the left-hand side is, again, it's looking systemically, it's looking holistically. So you want to move from sporadic well-being activity. So, we're going to, cycle to work this week and do this that week and all the rest of it, to what's the strategy around this? How are you building that up over time? You want to make it proactive rather than reactive if you possibly can. Again, this goes personally as well as organizationally. Data-driven, I couldn't let that one lie. So trying to do everything not based on anecdotal evidence. I, as an individual, as a leader of my business, have found mindfulness really useful. So therefore, I think everybody else will. Perhaps not. How do you know? Ideally, what you do is you roll that out in the business. You find out how many people are actually engaging with it, how many people are using it, and what data can I collect to show that the impact that has. You're moving from random to measurable. And again, that would allow you to build up a picture of what actually makes a difference rather than making changes based on anecdotal evidence. And again, that's kind of it comes into a final thing that we do at Sisu. We work with organizations to develop well-being and resilient strategies. So what does that look like for your business? How do you define that for your people? But also we use technology again. So we have a platform called Lumion, which gives people access when they need it to targeted data-driven interventions. People do a questionnaire once a week, just 10 questions, really simple. So making sure that it's grounded in the evidence, and it allows them as individuals to say, where am I at? Where's the areas that I'm struggling with when it comes to my well-being and resilience? And then they get targeted resources. So they get videos, they get worksheets, they get things to do just when they need them that can make a measurable difference to their well-being over time. And then what that also allows us to do is collect data on an organizational basis. So you can pull all that data and say, how are we looking like as a business? How are people feeling? And how does that correlate with some of the outcomes that we're wanting to achieve as a business, whether that's performance, whether that's reduced sickness absence, all those sorts of things. So that last bit is an incredibly whistle-stop tour of how to create a resilience strategy. Hopefully, there's some of this stuff that you're already doing already, but again, if you got any questions, I'll leave the last couple of minutes, and it is literally a couple of minutes. If anyone's got any questions around anything that I've mentioned today, but also, feel free to get in touch. We'd love to have a chat with you, whether it's to, thinking about your own personal well-being, resilience, other things that you want to do to check in with yourself, perhaps, but also more importantly for your business. Again, we work with lots of different organizations and all sorts of different sizes and all sorts of different industries. And, we truly believe that if we can, make a difference to people's and organizational well-being, resilience, all the rest of it, we can show measurable differences, measurable impact in terms of how people are thinking and feeling. We can change behavior, but we can also impact on the bottom line as well. I hope you found that interesting. More than that, I hope you found it useful. Even if there's one thing in there, my expectations are low. Even if there's one thing in there that you thought, that's quite useful, that's quite interesting, that's something I can take away, I'd be absolutely delighted by that. Check out the website, cccpsychology.co.uk. We've got a YouTube channel as well if you want to see more of my face talking about some things. Just type in CC Psychology into YouTube. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if there's any questions in the Q&A, and I'll cover off a few of those before we finish. All the best. Thanks.